This program is part of the Infinite Potato Alliance. Visit us at infinitepotato.com.
I'm Shane Thomas, and this is Analysing Doctor Who. I'm joined by Rick Tatro and Mike Robinson, and we are here to analyse Dot and Bubble. And if you have any thoughts on our thoughts, or anything else Doctor Who based, you can email us at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com. So if we just start with the episode rating, please. Mike, what do you give this out of 10?
Oh, I'll give it a 9.
Okay, what are you giving this, Rick?
I give it an 8.
Okay, I'm giving it 6. So, Rick, what from this episode did you like the most?
I was impressed with the creatures. I think that we're certainly seeing some of that Disney money at work here, especially for the Doctor Who monsters. I really liked the world building and the consistency of it.
Okay, Michael, what from this were you liking the most?
Things that I enjoyed the most: production design. Kind of going along with what Rick said, the world that they built had a consistent look. It had a consistent sort of sense of costuming. For something that's supposed to be very artificial and strange, it felt organic. It really did feel like a place that could exist within its own narrative space. Things fit together fairly well. Obviously, part of that plays towards the big reveal at the end, which I think was really neat. And I admire the way that the production design, particularly in terms of costuming, maybe didn't hide it. The big surprise caught me off guard, but it certainly slid it in a way that you might see it in something like Paradise Towers or Happiness Patrol. This idea of, the costume is supposed to look this certain way. The other thing that I really, really enjoyed was that narrative. That big surprise at the end was really amazing. I've been waiting for the show to tackle racism, and I know we're going to talk about that in a bit, but I was really pleased with the way that they did it. It reminded me of a kind of classic Star Trek episode, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. The kind of thing that, that really is going to blow somebody away. So those were my two favorite things.
As far as what I like the most, it's the scene when Lindy causes Ricky's death.
Access.
I've got it!
You're through! Don't worry about me! Lindy, watch out!
His surname is Coombs! He was born Richard Coombs, because I know everything about him. He changed his name to Ricky September when he reached 50,000 followers, but check your files, he was born Coombs. C comes before P!
Lindsay.
But that's the moment when any kind of plausible deniability around who this person is gone. It reminded me actually a little bit of another project that foregrounds race. It reminds me of the scene in Get Out when Rose doesn't give Chris the keys.
Rose.
I don't know where they are.
Rose? Rose! Rose, give me those keys! Rose, give me those keys. Rose, now! Now, the keys! Oh, be careful, girl.
What the fuck?
I didn't do anything.
What the fuck is going on?
Where are those keys, Rose?
You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?
Okay, well now we know who she is for definite. There's no ambiguity anymore. It's the scene where I think in general a lot of white viewers were shocked and like, wait, what? And a lot of black viewers were like, yeah, I fucking knew it. And Russell's very good at these kind of moments in stories. I'm thinking of without spoiling it, the denouement of Torchwood Children of Earth, and even aspects of Midnight, where a character crosses a Rubicon. They hit a point of no return where they've done or said something that you know is going to define them. That's the thing that defines who this person is. That's something they can't really come back from. And that moment is a moment where I think with the audience, I'm sure your opinions and mileage varied as we watched Lindy throughout the episode, but that was a moment where no reasonable person could make any more excuses for her. That was a Russell special. He's very good at that. That was definitely when I think the episode started to get better. Mike, if we come to what from the episode you like the least?
There's a trend that we've had recently where we don't have enough of the Doctor and Ruby. I don't know how this episode would have worked if we'd had more of them, but I really kind of feel like they were pushed off to the side a little bit. We just had our almost doctorless episode before this, and then we haven't had the two of them sort of running around too much in that classic Doctor Who way. So that was a little frustrating, and it felt slow in a couple of spots. When I didn't realize what was happening with Lindy, when I didn't understand what was going on, it felt like, oh man, we're just making her look stupid. And, how can she run into a lamppost, or how can she run into a desk? That felt like a little, I don't know, too much filler that could have allowed opportunity for our main characters to be doing some things.
It's just important for those who may not have realised that, just to be fair to Russell on that, part of the reason why there isn't, kind of like we said last week, like, where was the Doctor? He was on a set of Sex Education. So Ncuti wasn't available for a lot of the filming of this. He came onto this to start his job. So the scene with him at the end was his very first scene that he filmed.
Oh, that's amazing.
Oh,
I
wow.
actually did not know that. That's wild.
And Russell's spoken about this, and I know because you lot can't legally at least get Doctor Who Unleashed. He said he was debating it. He said that we had conversation like, should we give Ncuti this first up? Is this a bit unfair on him? Do we give him something else? And in the end, they decided that would be his first scene. If he had been available, maybe the episode's different. So Rick, what from this you like the least?
See, I've been having trouble with this question. While Mike was talking, I thought of a couple other things I liked that I didn't mention. Like, I love the ambiguous ending. I really loved the last second. The door shuts, cut to black. I'm having a hard time thinking of anything I really didn't like in this episode, because the things I didn't like, you're not supposed to like. There's nothing about the production of it that I thought didn't land or wasn't done well. Yeah, I really have no complaints about this one.
Yeah, what I think I did like the least, and Mike's really touched on it. He might use the word slow, and a lot of the episode before the final, I thought the final 10 minutes were actually very good. Before that, I don't think it was bad. That's why I've given it 6. But this was my least favourite of the series so far. I've given this what I've given The Devil's Cord. But the fundamental problem I had is that it's tough to be fully engaged. And I have rewatched it to make sure. Sometimes you rewatch something and you see something or appreciate something you didn't see first time round. I felt pretty much the same both times. It's tough to be engaged by someone you just don't like seeing on screen. And there is a difference, a very important distinction between a hateable character being compelling or interesting or just being hateable. Like, I can be engaged watching, like, Davros. And I know this fits Lindy's characterization, as you say, Rick. It's kind of the point. It fit the story that was being told. The issue is just slightly how the story was told, how it was engineered. It was engineered this way. I think people who love this episode, you both will probably say, well, that was on purpose. I agree, it was on purpose. My issue is with not just the outcome, but the process. Because I think this was the process, this was what they're trying to do. And there's nothing against Callie Cook's performance. I think Callie Cook, as I said, I think everything kind of here happened as it was engineered to happen for the most part. I think Callie Cook's performance is the performance that she would have wanted to give, that Dylan Holmes-Williams and Russell T Davies would wanted to give. I'm sure it's what everyone was looking for. They looked at the rushes, were like, yeah, this is great. This is what we want. It felt a little bit like Russell's first era, where at times you could feel the ambition of what they're going for in the episode straining against the reality of the production. Like, for example, we don't really have our lead character for most of it. We have him on set for one scene, and then that stuff with the in the bubble, that was kind of on a green, again, it's on Unleashed. He and Millie Gibson were kind of on green screens. So I definitely understand what you're going for, but there are some things that you're trying to do that, like, the gap between, and this is a case for every creative endeavor, the gap between what you've got in your head and then what the reality is. The best things are when the gap between the two is quite small, and the worst things are when the gap between the two, because no one makes something bad on purpose. But the bad things are when the gap between the ambition and the reality was quite wide. And I think there was a bit of a gap between the two here. I mean, another thing I thought of, it's important to remember that Russell wrote this episode. This is an 8-episode series. Russell's written 6. It's not actually a record. He actually wrote more in his first series back in 2005. But as far as percentage of the episodes, I don't think there's ever been so much that is just purely Russell. He's not rewriting anyone. And this felt a little bit like this is the one you should have probably given it to someone else. This felt like maybe one too many, because it's a lot of work. And I suspect that, not that he didn't give this one the attention he wanted to, but you only have so much bandwidth. There is only so much bandwidth a human being has. And this came off more like the... and this was the case back when it was like 12-episode series. Episodes like 5 to 8. You might get 1 or 2 good ones in there, but there was always at least one filler. It was one episode. It wasn't bad, but it was there, and I watched it, and I'm probably never going to think about it again. Had we not been podding about this, I probably wouldn't have thought about this episode that much since watching it. In the earlier parts of the episode, I felt there was a bit of a lack of urgency. I think the nature of monsters don't help, because they are incredibly slow-moving and don't have like much personality or will, or we don't understand anything about them themselves. So there's not a feeling of immense danger, despite the fact there is quite a high body count. And actually, the monsters, I didn't think they were terrible, but I remember seeing a picture of them with all these exterior locations. Fans are showing up, taking pictures, posting on social. So I remember seeing a picture of this slug around a year ago, a little over a year ago, and people making jokes of, so this is where the Disney money's going. Because they look more like older monsters. I mean, they look slightly better. They didn't kind of like look in a way where I'm like, these look shit. It's like Doctor Who. But these did remind me more of monsters from 2011. When you hear the phrase Disney money, and it's not all Disney money, by the way. I think people assume that like Bob Iger's just writing them a check every week.
No, they don't do that.
Yeah, it's not. It don't work like that.
No, but they definitely have higher budgets.
Oh yes, 100%. 100%.
So Shane, you were talking about this idea of Lindy. I didn't notice the slowness of it until I rewatched it today. But one of the things that I'm always telling my students is that the thing that Russell T Davies does very well is he tries to find a way to welcome new viewers in, but he always or often pitches something for those of us that have been watching forever. And one of the things that I really liked about this episode, in many ways, it was telegraphing that it was going to be something else. Like, we kind of felt like, this is one of those Blink kind of things. Like, I'm never going to say, this is as good as Blink. This is going to be one of those Blink kind of things. And Lindy is a kind of Sally Sparrow, and it's really going to be watching Lindy try to figure out what's happening, and Lindy becoming this really great person. And when she runs into Ricky September, it's kind of like, she's found somebody and she's really making it. And as you pointed out a while ago, it's not really until she does that horrible, horrible thing that the selfishness and the almost cruel nature of her personality, you realize, that's who she is. Like, she's not just casually cruel. She's down at her core kind of vapid and awful. But that was one of the things that I really, really liked about it, was that it was telegraphing that it was another sort of episode, even right up to when the doctor says to her, you could come with us. We all sort of looked at each other like, he's asking her to travel in the TARDIS? Like, what's going on here? And by that point, we know she's gotten Ricky killed. So it was kind of like, I expected something to happen there. And then we got that bang. Oh my God, it's racism. And, rewatching it today, I saw all the things that I should have picked up on. But that was something that I really liked about the narrative, was the way that it, in many ways, it was pretending to be very, like you said earlier, this very sort of, it's just standard Doctor Who plot. Like, we're going to do this. This is an episode we're doing. And I thought that was one of the really great things about it, was that it just spun that so well, that it acted like we were going to try to care about Lindy and feel sorry for her, and then bang. So for me, the slowness was really that second time I saw it, that it was kind of like, man, this is just not moving the way that it could. But the first time we were really kind of like I said, caught up in it. That sense of, it's at the desk next to her is a very kind of Blink-like moment. Like, there's something over there, and be really careful. It's that close to you, and it's going to kill you. For me, that was the appeal.
My point was just that, because things I wasn't getting Blink vibes from this at all, in as much I wasn't getting Sally Sparrow vibes from this at all, because, to my earlier point, how you create the protagonist, I got nothing of Sally Sparrow from Lindy, and I think that was deliberate. But I wasn't having that whole, this is a journey of growth for her, where escaping these creatures, she will become a better person in the process and become the kind of person that might go traveling the Doctor. I was never getting any of that. I wasn't getting anything about Sally Sparrow, who is an incredibly empathetic character.
It's odd that you both had trouble with the pacing on this episode. Usually, I'm the first one to complain about slow pacing, and I thought this one worked just fine. I watched it for the second time today. Now, I will grant you, I was kind of half dozing when I watched it the first time, so I actually missed the critical line. And so when I contacted you, Shane, and said I want to be on this show, and you were like, all right, I was going to call you anyway, but I want to talk about the racism, and I was like, racism? Because it was just that one line that made it clear, and I think I had nodded off at that point, and then I came back and was like, oh, they just don't want to go with him, and and he was upset about it. And then when I watched it again, I saw, it was very clear, but again, it was blink and you missed it, because I did. Then seeing it, and especially now knowing that was Shudi's first day on the set, his reaction makes a lot more sense now. Not the reaction, but the portrayal of it, the screaming and drooling and spinning around and all that seemed a little over the top, but it's not inappropriate either.
We did hear the line, and we still had a long pause, because it was, wait, what? I think that's why I keep trying to spin this idea of kind of like the fake out quality of the episode. It was kind of like, wait, what? What did they say? What did they mean? What are they talking about? It was really just this kind of stunning moment. We don't usually get from Doctor Who, like we get people that are awful, and sometimes we get that disaster movie kind of thing where some people survive and other people don't survive, and you're not really sure if maybe this guy should have survived. And sometimes we get people that we go back and we look at it and it's like, they're a little more awful than they were. I don't ever remember getting to the end of an episode of Doctor Who and thinking to myself, wow, I hope this character doesn't make it. Like, I really get on your boat, sail on out. For us, the boat looked like it was that tunnel in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? And we were kind of like, get on your Willy Wonka boat and just sail on out of here, people. That to me was just a trip, but it stunned us so much that it actually took us a moment to kind of realize what would happen.
Now, one thing I noticed on my second watch through it, because it puzzled me the first time, and I just kind of blew it off as they think physical contact is weird. When what's the girl's name? Penny? No. Follow.
Oh, Lindy.
Lindy, thank you. When she asks if the Doctor and Ruby are in the same room, and then when she realizes that, she's disgusted. That's a foreshadowing that I didn't catch until the second time through. And even the second time through, I was like, well, she's just upset that they're in the same room. And then, oh, wait, no. Right. Yes, she's upset they're in the same room, but for a completely different reason.
That's another one of those things where, to me, that was kind of like, oh, people are thinking the Doctor's kind of weird. Or, oh, people are thinking the Doctor's being a jerk. I didn't put it together, what was happening. But, yeah, they're all over the place. When you go back and watch that second time, those signals are all there. She talks about how upset she is when he breaks back into the line. She talks, I think, once or maybe twice about how he'll be punished. A second viewing is really neat of this.
There's a number of those, which we will get into. But before we get into that section, one of the other major things that came from this episode was the rendering of like tech and social media. Rick, I'll come to you first on this. Like, there was, I think, some Black Mirror comparisons to this, but your take on what it did with like tech and social media.
Initially, I was upset by it because, I am of an age. I just turned 60 last month. And a lot of my contemporaries are the ones on Facebook bitching about kids and their cell phones. I don't particularly share that viewpoint. I know plenty of people my age and older who are every bit as addicted to their screens as any 10-year-old or 15-year-old. So initially, I thought this episode was all about that. That's what kind of stuck in my craw. I was like, all right, I'm so sick of boomers bitching about this. But then again, that's the purpose of science fiction or fantasy, is to take things to the ridiculous extreme to point out we're on the precipice of something like that. And I kind of like the way Davies did it in this one. It was certainly unique. We've seen plenty of science fiction stories in the future where people live in the internet, Ready Player One, this proposed future where nobody leaves their house and everybody's just jacked into this virtual world. I thought this was an interesting take where people are living in the physical world, but they don't interact with it, and they're completely puppeted around by the AI and stuff. I thought it was a little ridiculous when Lindy couldn't walk around a lamppost on her own, but Doctor Who is also for kids, so sometimes it has to be a lot less than subtle.
Yeah, but also on the official Doctor Who pod, Terrell Charles was on it this week, and he actually said, and obviously it's an exaggeration, but he said, because I'm thinking when this was written, this probably, I think, was when they were pushing, Zuckerberg in particular, trying to push the whole metaverse thing, basically VR headsets. And I think he said something that if you put one of VR headsets on for a bit and then you take them off, you do feel slightly disoriented. So in this world, they essentially have them on all the time. They have them on more often than they don't. That once you take them off, then there is a detachment from the real world. I mean, Davis said that they had so many different episode titles. One of the proposed episode titles for this was IRL, but they didn't go with that in the end. Mike, if I come to you about the whole social media and tech thing in this episode?
I think I read an interview somewhere, and it might have been the Radio Times, that Russell T Davies had this idea
Yes, 2010.
Yeah, 2010. Yeah, so for the Moffat era, that idea of this cyberspace place, and again, I think that's part of the fun of the fake out here. It really does look like it's going to be a kind of episode that goes in a certain direction, or maybe it does go in a certain direction, but they realize that it can't sustain it long enough. There were a lot of references I saw to Black Mirror. I think we mentioned that earlier. Lindy's character is very much like Bryce Dallas Howard's character in the Black Mirror episode Nosedive, which we will watch every now and then in my we didn't do it this year, but we watch every now and then in my some of my TV classes. I'm with you, Rick. I work with young people all the time, and happy 60th, by the way, buddy.
Oh, thank you.
I work with kids all the time, and there are moments where I've stood out in the front yard and watched kids come off the bus and just watch them walk back home because I just want to make sure they don't get killed. Like I've seen a neighborhood kid go right down the middle of the road looking square at their phone, and it's like, well, I'll just stand here, to kind of make sure that nothing happens. But I've also seen a lot of students do a lot of really smart stuff with a lot of access to technology. A lot of times, this is what science fiction is really good at. It's good at taking metaphors and running them to the absurd. But I think what makes this, like when you say, oh, it's like Black Mirror, it doesn't run to parody. Like it would have been so easy to make this a silly, stupid thing. It gets you into that point of, well, this is kind of weird. This is kind of creepy. And, maybe it's silly that someone's in a room and, just a couple of paces to the side, one of their friends is getting eaten and they don't know it. But it is kind of an interesting discussion of, what are we not seeing? What are we not seeing when we live in this bubble? What are we not picking up on? And then, what do we create? I guess when you tie it into the big racism reveal at the end, what happens when we create a bubble, an echo chamber around ourselves where we only see certain people and they only think certain ways. So I really enjoyed that. And I thought that they were able to do it without being too condescending. But I think they constructed a group of people who were, I think I called them vapid earlier. They're self-centered and they're they're more than a little privileged too. So that's kind of interesting as well. That kind of idea that for some, this technology can be a kind of amazing paradise, but it has some consequences that go with it.
Yeah, with this, there is like a slight shot at how we sometimes use text, so like connecting with people on devices when you are manually in the same space. I'll message someone rather than actually speak to them, and that's something that does sometimes happen in real life. But I don't think this episode actually was so much a shot at tech, but a warning about where it can potentially take us. So one of the things about this group in the bubble, they are all incredibly infantile, and there is a potential danger. It can also go the other way, but there's a potential danger that the rise of tech can infantilize us. It reminded me a little bit of some of the human characters in WALL-E. You don't become self-sufficient in anything. I think it's when some people are actually worried about the rise of AI. You become so not just wedded to your tech, but you just expect that to take care of everything. So now you don't have to do anything for yourself, and it somehow dulls and blunts human growth, human consciousness, or anything like that. And yes, the friends in the bubble are all their concerns are incredibly like vacuous and superficial. I think there's partly though to do with a point intersection, you've already mentioned this, Mike, of not just tech but also wealth, because the idea that wealthy people have vacuous concerns was the case long before the telephone was invented. There's nothing new about that. It may be manifest slightly differently because of technology and because of devices, but that issue is not a new issue. And I think it's more an issue where tech and social media could go wrong, where it is, because I think of it now, and my God, of course, lots of problems. But then I also think because of social media is how the knowledge I have. I'm thinking globally now. There is more than one atrocity happening right now, and because of social media, I do have a measure of, not as much as I like, but a measure of knowledge about arguable genocides in the Congo and Sudan right now. And even because of Doctor Who, go and look at Jo Martin's Instagram. The Fugitive Doctor is a perfect example for that. And then Verada Setu, constant messages from her regarding the atrocities in Gaza and Palestine. And it's because of social media I have access to that stuff. And also can't forget, obviously, the Israeli hostages as well, who still haven't been returned yet. But without social, take that away, and then my knowledge of that becomes a lot less. And I wouldn't like that. So I don't think it's because social media equals bad all the time, but as with all things, it's how it's used and who's using it. There was a tweet that went around where someone said that Dot and Bubble isn't a complaint about Gen Z being on their phones, but it's about the dangers of echo chambers, specifically racist echo chambers, that are created by tech companies with racist algorithms, which is a much more accurate depiction of how tech is rendered, and also is what the problem with tech is. Often it's how it's constructed, how it's assembled, and for what benefit. And it's interesting you both raised the point of age, because I did think watching this, yeah, there's definitely an argument saying younger people could do with having a look at this, but I also felt that younger people might look at this and literally just think, oh, okay, boomer, thanks Russell. Yeah. that kind of thing where it's like, yes, you're right, but this is exactly the kind of argument that they might just immediately reject. When we were young, we all had that when an older person has told you something. They might have been giving you very good advice, but you felt instantly, almost reflexively, just like, I'm not fucking listening to that.
That's partially sometimes it's a failing on the part of people, on the older person. I have a 12-year-old daughter, which for someone my age, that's a lot more work than I thought it would be. But being a parent is physically a job for the young. I'm glad I'm her dad now because of where my head is. Because I can appreciate now, and I've even said this to her sometimes, I'll be like, I try to talk you out of this, but there are some things you just need to learn for yourself. You're not going to listen to me even if I tell you don't do that.
I'm 56 with a 16-year-old, so I've lived in your country, right?
So I think the big thing to come out of this was the revelation, or obvious reveal, depending on perspective, regarding its depiction of race and racism, specifically with Lindy. Now, usually when we do these, I introduce a topic, I bring you two in first. Probably maybe for one time only. I'm actually going to start on this, and then I will bring you both in. So immediately, and it's the main thing that people have mentioned, watching the episode first, 2 minutes? Lindy is reaching out to her friends, use that slightly heavy quotation marks, and it's first person's white, second person's white, fourth person's white, fifth, sixth person's white, and at that point I was like, oh, hold on, what's going on? Because Doctor Who recently in this series, and I would say, and this I still want to say this sometimes because I jump on his back quite a lot, so I do think it's important to be fair. Chris Chibnall's era, I think he really normalised this, where you see episodes of Doctor Who, Doctor goes wherever, adventure wherever, and you generally see a fairly multiracial cast, and I'm not just mean the primary central characters. Diversity along lines of race and gender and some disability and stuff. That was something I think Chibnall I think that's probably the best thing from his era. The way he made that normal, I think that's carried on in this series. So that was the first alarm. They haven't done this in the past, so I'm not sure why this is happening now. Russell did mention this on Unleashed.
It'll be interesting to see the response to this episode. I think the main response to this episode is going to be about the ending. What we can't tell is how many people will have worked that out before the ending, because they've seen white person after white person after white person. And television these days is very diverse. I wonder, will you be 10 minutes into it? Will you be 15? Will you be 20? Before you start to think everyone in this community is white? And if you don't think that, why didn't you?
The idea of where we ended up, as you mentioned, Mike, there are a lot of clues and a lot of deliberately nothing overt but clear, particularly if that's been aspects of your life experience. If you rewatch it, watch Callie Cook whenever just the Doctor appears on screen. If you watch her face, like she is somewhat repelled by him. And the ultimate notion of the Doctor has the ability and the desire to save them, and they reject him. It reminded me a little bit of, I think it was the first Women's March, the big protest against Trump when he was inaugurated. And I remember seeing a sign from a black woman there. I think it said, "Black woman try to save you all," because I think it was like 47% white women vote for him. It's important to state that, and I've seen there's quite been a lot of talk on social about this. The idea of someone doing a racist thing or being racist, sometimes it's born out of ignorance. Plenty of time it's not. A person is fully aware of what they're doing, and they're doing it because they enjoy it. I think it's an uncomfortable thing to acknowledge about human beings, and this is with all forms of bigotry, not just racism, that bigots are bigots because of the pleasure it gives them. I guess it's akin to maybe, and I don't think these are the same things, but akin to the pleasure an addict gets, even if they know what they're taking is bad for them. So, and the reason why they're not identical is because one gives them power, one doesn't. The power that white supremacy gives these characters, they love that more than anything, even if it is to ultimately their own death. It's not something they would ever give up, as counterproductive and as poisonous as it is. The reason why Lindy and those other characters treat the Doctor how they treated him, say what they say to him, is obvious, because they ultimately love racism more than their own lives. That's why these things are so embedded. It's a tough thing to acknowledge, that why would you love being so willfully cruel or willfully evil? Sadly, some people do. That's often why it continues. Because people, and this is the same if we're talking about like misogynists or homophobes, it's Pride Month. They do it because they like it, and you can't convince them out of it. And they're not in it for a conversation or a debate. And they're not in it for an exchange of, like, the marketplace of ideas and free exchange of ideas, which I know for you two, that's kind of part of what you do for a living. But they're not in it for that. They're in it just to try and make you as angry as possible. And the angrier you get, the more they love it. I mean, and the ironic thing is, through all the maelstrom of emotion that the Doctor's feeling at the end, I think he ultimately sees what happens in the end as a failure. Now, the Doctor's not a failure, but he sees what he couldn't save him, which is what the Doctor's meant to do. So he thinks, I failed, even though there's nothing he could have done. There's more I can say, but that was me just setting the table. So, yeah, Rick, if you want to comment on that now.
I'm embarrassed, and I'm going to admit this because I am embarrassed. I didn't catch that the cast was all lily white until my second viewing. And then it was like, how could I have missed that? My only thinking is that's what I grew up with. That's the way television was the majority of my life. And so it just didn't twig to me. Then the second time through, I was like, oh, and then started seeing all of the setups for it.
I'm just as honest as you are. I didn't get it. I didn't see it. And so, again, I was given permission to be academic earlier. But we talking in culture studies and pop culture studies about text being polysemic, right? There's multiple meanings for multiple audiences. And I think that this episode can do, and I think that's one of the things that makes it great, is that it can be for, and again, I'm not going to speak for people of color, but I'm going to say for people of color, it is probably, oh, I see this quickly, I see what's going on. For a white middle-class viewer like myself, it is a good reminder to pay attention to things. That's why I brought up that old Star Trek episode. Do you remember that episode, guys? That's the one where the aliens are black on one side, white on the other. I remember being a kid. Like, I don't know how old I was when I first saw it. But I remember, when they, towards the end of that episode, it's like, he's black on this side of his face, but I'm black on this side of his face. And I just remember being a kid and thinking, well, that's stupid. But it was like, I didn't see it. I didn't get it. And that was the message. You should have seen it. You should have realized it. I think it's a little less sophisticated in that old Star Trek. But I think that an episode can, and that's one of the reasons I like this so much, is that I think an episode can be multiple things for multiple people. Sometimes Star Trek, I always joke that Star Trek often has the subtlety of a hammer blow to the head. And Doctor Who can be that way sometimes too, but this one really can get you at a different level depending upon who you are and what you are and where you're coming from. But I think back to the point you're making there, Rick, like this episode serves a different sort of spin to different audiences, which is one of the things that I think makes it really exciting, really fun, a little bit more than its initial fluffiness might make it seem to be. I think that's why I pushed it up so high, because to me it really was, I like to acknowledge when something got me. I like to acknowledge when the narrative surprised me, and I think that's exactly what they did. My wife, to her credit, was saying, everybody's got blue eyes, but we couldn't, we didn't see it beyond that. So it was really kind of interesting.
And I realized what my struggle was earlier is you laid everything out so well, Shane, that I didn't have anything else to add, but I felt like I needed to say something. So
I think of an episode like this, and then I think of an episode like the Shakespeare Code, which I thought did terribly on race, which he didn't write, but he was in charge at the time. He would have rewrote that. And I wonder if that's almost Russell 2024 talking to Russell of, I think 2008. And there has been some criticism, not from racists or people like that, but from people, and some black people, who didn't like how it was done. There is room for a breadth of opinion on this. I think some people didn't like that the Doctor tried to save the racists, and the Doctor showed inhuman patience with them at the end, despite how he was being disrespected. I didn't have a problem with that at all, because the Doctor's still the Doctor, and the Doctor hasn't changed because he's black. This is what any other Doctor would do. The Doctor wouldn't all of a sudden go, oh, even though he realises what's going on, oh, you're white supremacists, so no chance. That's not who the Doctor is. I mean, as someone pointed out online, that he tried to save Davros from dying at the end of Journey's End, the 10th. It's not out of character. I think this is a case, and this is one thing I do think where social media has affected the younger generation, where they kind of want themselves affirmed to the point they want their characters, and the POV character, the Doctor, to act like them. Well, I would do that. I'm sure you would. But that's one of many thousands of reasons why you would never be like the Doctor. The Doctor, in some ways, is our hero, so he's meant to be a little bit better than us. Some, again, were frustrated they didn't get the satisfaction of seeing Lindy and her lot die at the end, even though it's almost certain they did. But that, again, I think totally defeats the point, because that ending is not meant to satisfy you. It's meant to leave you frustrated. It's meant to leave you like the Doctor, gritted teeth, howling at the moon. So you don't get the satisfaction of seeing them die. One criticism I think is more fair is how it depicted racism on an interpersonal level from one person to another, not structurally, when it is a structural thing and we don't. Partly because I think the episode is more focused on trying to show us one thing and then give us another thing. So you don't get an idea of the society, you don't get an idea of how a structure like this flourishes for people to believe the things they believe. I understand that frustration. There was, I mean, I'm coming with one thread in particular where, and I just respectfully disagree with it, of the idea of, you see all the white faces, oh, you must get the idea that something's wrong, where someone said, but Doctor's always had, like, lots of white people in it. And it's like, well, yes, but less so since 2005, and definitely less so in the past, like 2-3 years. If I saw a Chibnall episode like that, I'd be scratching my head. I'd be asking questions. Because that's not what we're used to, and it's not what you see on TV. It would have been odd. I don't agree with that at all, but why would this be different than other Doctor Who? It's different than Doctor Who in the past 2 years. So if you watch over the past 2 years, this actually isn't normal. And I think Russell dares to make the point that it shouldn't be normal.
Perhaps another way to look at that is to say, well, maybe you never got it. Maybe you got it a few minutes into the episode. Maybe you got it at the very end. But you better get it next time, right? Maybe that's the other way to walk away from that, is to kind of say, from here on out, maybe you should be asking yourself those questions. Like, what is happening? What am I seeing? Why am I seeing it? That might be another way to look at it, too. And
the interesting thing, what this episode has done with Lindy, is that a couple of days out now from this episode as we're recording, I don't know if I've ever seen a character in Doctor Who more despised than this woman. There are people, slightly tongue-in-cheek, saying, like, Lindy or Davros, who was worse? There was one thing where they put, like, a picture of saying the slugs are actually the real heroes of this episode. And one person put a picture of, like, a slug and Lindy side by side. And they used that phrase, I mean, it's obviously a very crude word, but how often I think in the drag community, sometimes you're serving something, sometimes you use the phrase, like, serving cunt. And someone put Lindy and the slug side by side, said, slug, serving cunt, Lindy is one.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, the level of just absolute, and I'm not complaining for the record, but I think Russell got what he intended. Like, people, if she ever showed up again somehow, I think people would throw stuff at the screen. She is absolutely, and that's the credit obviously of Callie as well, she is despised. And she definitely is, not just the infantile way she acts, but the spoilt way she is. She has all that entitlement of a child who, like, she's a child that got everything she ever, not wanted, but demanded. Like, she's like Veruca Salt from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It is interesting that what clearly has worked is just how much people hate, and I do mean hate, the character of Lindy Pepper Bean. And one other important thing to mention is just at the Ruby at the end. If you get a chance to rewatch it, obviously your eye would understandably be taken by the Doctor's reaction in that moment. But Ruby's reaction is very good, and I think she actually notices it even first. And someone said, and this kind of comes back to the thing I've said even in our preview about what does being raised by two black women, what will that do for Ruby? She recognises what's going on immediately. And whether it's anecdotally should have been told, or more likely stuff that she's experienced. Like, she's just silently crying a little bit, and she doesn't kind of know what to do. And it's a nice just little bit of acting from her, where it's that feeling of, if you've had something like that happen to someone you care about, who is, if we just say, from an oppressed group, and like, they can't do anything, but also you can't do anything to make it any better. Yeah. And Ruby just stands with him, puts a hand on his shoulder, but also knows there's nothing she can say in that moment, nothing she can do in that moment. It's not obviously the primary takeaway from this, but I thought it was also pretty well done, of that feeling, when someone you care about is hurt, and they're hurt for such an unjust reason, and you almost feel as helpless as they do. And that, I think, was probably the best thing from that scene, was the level of helplessness that Ruby and particularly the Doctor have, because there is nothing you can do. It's the kind of thing you wish you could just do something to change it immediately, and there isn't a thing. It's too big, it's too embedded, and it feels like it can't be stopped.
I was impressed that, because one thing, I really wanted Ruby to say this, but it would have been so wrong for her to do it, but I really wanted someone to go, all right, well, come on, fuck them. let's just go. Because that's what I wanted to yell. But the fact that they didn't have Ruby say something along those lines, I think, showed a remarkable amount of restraint and was the right call.
Well, exactly, because even something like that, it kind of gives them, and specifically us vicariously as the audience, some kind of feeling of satisfaction or restitution or something, some recompense. And the whole point is that there isn't any. The reparations conversation refuses to start. So we are left in that place where, and just because I'm sure you'd be the same, you might be the same in the situation, but you also know that would be totally ineffectual. It's a totally understandable impulse. And that it's a part of the reason why I thought this was the best bit of the episode. It was the right thing to really have them do nothing, because there is nothing that you can do, and it's meant to leave you frustrated. It's meant to leave you almost anxious and unsettled. You almost can't sit comfortably once you see something like that, which I think is part of why it was so well done. That bit. I mean, I personally think, and you two have already alluded to this, I think Russell would be happy if he has caused white fans to watch this and then think about themselves in their own lives as far as how they engage with the episode, and then maybe further afield. Because I do think, and this is where I think there have been some black fans who haven't liked this episode, is that I think it's an episode written about racism for white people. I think some people would assume that as a pejorative. Sometimes it is, but in this instance I don't think it is. Partly because it's written by a white person, and also the same way that misogyny is a male problem and transphobia is a cis problem, racism is a white people problem. If you're writing this for them to get something out of it, then fine, go right ahead. I have no problem with that. This definitely was not an episode written about racism, I think, for the benefit of people of colour. And part of the reason is because your point of view character for most of this is a white woman. The person of colour shows up right at the end. So while I'm sure we obviously all immediately empathise with him, we're not seeing what happened through his experience. We're seeing it through Lindy's experience. And I think it's probably part of the point of we'll be conditioned with how we watch TV, and also usually the protagonist we get on TV, to see things through her eyes. And you see why you shouldn't maybe have done that. Because that's generally how we do things, or how we're conditioned to do things in real life. In terms of who we give the benefit of the doubt to, who we relate to, who we can identify with. It's like, it goes back to the old Dole test. So for Russell to do that here, some people had a problem with that. I don't have a problem with an episode written about racism aimed at white people. I get white people tend to get prioritised quite a lot. But on something like this, kind of like Killers of the Flower Moon, something like this, I don't mind whiteness and specifically white supremacy being put front and centre.
I think one of the things that I really like about the episode is that it's done in a much more... there's an easy way you could have done this. You could have set this in the American South during the Civil War, right? There are less subtle ways to have done it. I think that's one of the really kind of amazing things here, is that our main character falls victim to something real world. Not a space ray or a hate beam or some kind of racism pill, but just a very real thing, even though it's in a fantastic setting. I think that's really pretty powerful. And I don't think that happened to Joe Martin. I don't think that happened to Joe either.
She hadn't really been on screen long enough. Give us that spin-off, Russell. Give us that spin-off. But no, this is the first time. And also, I don't think partly explains the reaction. It might have the reaction anyway, but it does underline the reaction, because the Doctor's how many thousands of years old, and this would have been the first time, as far as we're aware, that they would have experienced something like this directly to them. Not that it wouldn't hurt if it happened to someone you cared about, but it's different when it happens straight to you, because the whole point is to make you feel like nothing, and the Doctor would never have had that before. And it's kind of a adversary the Doctor can't beat with wit or charm or thinking. There's no like escape hatch. Your sonic screwdriver ain't going to get you out of this one. There is nothing you can do. So it is definitely a first-time experience for the Doctor. And I remember so there was questions asked when Ncuti was cast about, do they understand that a black person's playing this character now? Are they going to write it that way? Ncuti was asked about this at the US and the LA premiere. He didn't obviously give nothing away, but he said, yeah, it's there. And the most interesting thing is if, and it's just an if at this stage, if that has any impact on how this character develops and changes. Those experiences in real life change people. But it's interesting if that is kind of a seed of a slight change in this character over the next year at least. We know he's going to be here for at least one more year. So, Rick, do you have any additional little observations we might have missed?
The last time you had me on, I put forth the theory that I think that there's some aspect of this season that is not real. And the fact that they mentioned, wait, her mom is the same face that was on the ambulances. I think the characters are starting to twig that something's up. I'm still standing by my theory that there's some underlying something going on here. I don't know if it's completely like they're stuck on a holodeck or they're in their own heads or something, but there's some exterior force at work here. And I think the Doctor and Ruby, or maybe just Ruby, are starting to see through the cracks of it.
I think that is a theory that obviously you said 2 weeks ago, Emma said last week, I think Ken might have said last week as well, and has just been growing to a point now where I think people are now expecting, like, how it manifests. I think that's where the debate is. But I think people are like, okay, something isn't right here. And I think there have been conversations about, are we seeing things out of order? Are they not all in chronology as the Doctor and Ruby are experiencing it? Everyone, I think, is almost accepting, taking as read now that there is something that we're seeing. There's a big shoe to drop. We don't know what. Yeah. But there is a big shoe to drop, and something is being hidden from us. Virtual reality, alternate timeline. What happened to Ruby in the snow? Ruby's apparently 3,000 years old. So we're seeing Susan Twist every week. I'm sure we'll see her next week. I mean, it is now just guess when Susan Twist shows up and what she'll be doing. But we know it's going to be something. So I feel, if you're wrong, Rick, it's you and a lot of people. A lot of people, I think, are with you on this.
And let's not forget Mrs. Flood, who talked to us on the Church and Ruby Road, who broke the fourth wall and spoke to us directly. And I'm still waiting for the payoff there.
Yeah, that may not be this series. We have to wait a bit longer for that.
I kind of assumed that the performer's name is Susan Twist, right? I kind of assumed that this had something to do with The One Who Waits. But that's one of the things that I really, really enjoy about Doctor Who in general, but I think Russell T Davies is so good at it, is that it gets into those long-term plot things that I just devoured in my childhood, growing up on Marvel Comics, and that it can go horribly wrong and it can get too intricate and it can get all tangled together. But when Russell T Davies is doing it at his best, it's really a lot of fun to watch it happen. So I'm really enjoying that.
Do you have anything else, Rick?
No, I think that's it.
The only other, I didn't actually have much myself. And I don't think this was a point, is that the idea of, because the slugs have taken over the homeworld, I believe it is, like their main planet, you get a brief shot that they basically killed everyone. I think someone proffered an interesting thought that maybe they're the indigenous characters of, like, the Wildwood, and it's a case of the indigenous people of this world. This is actually this is why they're killing everyone. The colonizers. That was an important line I forgot to do with race. This, I mean, even before, this really was the killer line. I forget the guy's name.
That's what I said. That's so lucky.
Yeah, we can go out there to this planet and we can fight it, tame it, and own it. And be pioneers, just like our ancestors.
Very unsubtle colonizer language. We will tame this world and we will own it. The only other thing is the Ricky September character, as a lot of people said, he was written to be Doctor-like, and how Lindy was a lot more comfortable going along with him, because this is like her version of a Doctor, white and blonde, and it does the thing that the Doctor would usually do. And if you watch it, I think he's actually doing a close of a stereotype of Tennant. And Mike, we should come to your MVP for the episode.
Oh my gosh, I've forgotten her name. Who played Lindy? It was Callie Cook?
Callie Cook, yeah.
She's got to be the MVP. I mean, she's awful, and that doesn't happen by accident. I think it is a amazing performance that can allow you, and like, there's moments where you try to like her, there's moments where you feel sorry for her, and when she turns, right, when she makes it obvious, I shouldn't say when she turns, she's always been that way, but when it becomes obvious, that cruelty and that self-interest, and then that horrible lie she tells afterwards, about, he went to save other people. That's just outstanding acting. I mean, it just really, really was amazing. And if you had somebody of a lower caliber in that part, it probably wouldn't have been possible to have this episode work as well as it did.
Okay, and Rick, your MVP?
I got to give it to Russell. I think everybody was perfectly competent in this one, but I think the story is really what is important. I don't think anyone did a bad job, but I think it was very skillfully written and delivered that gut punch in just exactly the right way.
Yeah, I struggled a bit with this because it's an episode that just for me the whole didn't equal some of its parts. So all the stuff we have plenty to talk about. And all the stuff we've spoken about are like, oh yeah, these are interesting ideas and these are things I would like to see in genre fiction. But how the whole thing came together, I think there was just slight at times lack of... Again, the ambition I just don't think was match the execution and just the precision of how it was executed. So I don't think anyone did any bad work, but I'm just thinking, how did I feel during the episode? So thinking about when I was really engaged the most is actually, I think, down to Murray Gold, who's going to be my MVP, who does the composer, who does the score. In those final moments, we hear the Doctor's theme, which we've heard a bit now, and this Doctor's theme is very, I think it's fitting for this Doctor, upbeat, lively, full of energy, full of life and almost seeming optimism. And he constructs a much slower and darker and maudlin version of the theme. If you watch it back, you'll hear it. It's a great theme anyway, but I think why I liked how he did that so much was you hear the original theme and you just wouldn't think, oh, you can't do a slowed down, darker, moody version of this, and oh, he managed it. And I just think in that moment I was truly gripped. So I'm going to give him the credit for that. And I can't imagine he'll get MVP much or many other times in this series. So yeah, he's mine. So listeners, if you have any thoughts about what we've spoken about, you can email us at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com. It's analysing spelt with an S. And despite our complaints about social media, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at analysingdw. So Mike, Rick, thank you for both being here.
Thanks for having me.
And we will be back next week to analyse Rogue. Until next time. Our logo is courtesy of Scott Mattison. His work can be found at planetrisecreative.com and on Twitter at planetrise. Our theme tune is by Mike Mould. We can be reached at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com and on Twitter at analysingdw.